Hello, everyone. This is Professor Jeff Wilkerson, bringing you today an introduction to the textbook Astronomers as Observers and Experimenters, as published by Kendall Hunt. And we'll talk about the introduction and exercise one here together in a very short way. So, this is a collection of exercises that I hope users can use to probe the aspects of astronomy as a science that they wish to probe. That they would, when I use this textbook and I use it with my students every year, I like to think about how we learned what we learned, the issues that came along, the struggles that were a part of that, and sort of, one of the stories that I like to tell is, and I think I wrote about this in this edition of the lab book. I really don't have a lot of interest in teaching a one semester courses that is just the solar system or just stars and galaxies, like you see some places. I like to teach all of it in 14 weeks or 15 weeks of the semester. And I know that runs counter to what a lot of people do. And I think it's about this idea that I don't have a lot of, when I'm teaching the course, I don't have a lot of interest in the facts that the knowledge of the universe and the facts that we've built up. And I don't care that much how much the students know about the moons of Jupiter. It's interesting stuff and it's good stuff to learn, or how much they know about the details of stellar interiors or about the details of anything. But the sort of process of unfolding, of layering back, of taking observations, modeling with those observations, and building a model of the physical universe, and then testing that model. And that's what this lab book is all about. So I like for students to see that when we're talking about trying to understand whether external galaxies um, are external galaxies, or whether, the Curtis-Shapley debate, if you will, the Shapley-Curtis debate, if if these smudges on the sky are external galaxies, or if they are small wisps of gas within the Milky Way. That's the kind of thing. We're arguing, we're looking at data, we're trying to model, we're taking the best data we have, we're pushing right to the edge of what we're able to do with the data we have, and making the models and testing those models. And I want students to see the resonance with the story of Brahe and Kepler and Galileo and Newton, and how we're struggling to try to understand the geometry of what we now call the solar system, and trying to think about what fits the data better, what model fits better, and what tweaks to the models, and how do we test those models. And that's the holistic nature of that, the entirety of that, is what is what's really important to me, and I hope that comes through in this textbook somewhat. And with that, then, in the introduction, we've identified a few learning goals. These are sample learning goals. I assume that every single user of this textbook will have their own unique set of learning goals and outcomes, things that they want to get out of here, and to think about how to map those onto the different exercises, and how to learn, how to pick exercises, choose which exercises we want to do here based on the goals that we're trying to achieve in the course. And so different exercises lend themselves more so to different goals, and some of them can be relatively simple and have a little tiny piece of what we're trying to do, and others can be kind of broad and encompassing. And so the order that we do them, the way we scaffold the experiences, matters as well. And so the exercises are numbered 1 through 28 with 3 projects at the end. No sense that you need to do those in any particular order, other than I would do exercise 1 first, and when I do it with my students next, I might actually do that as homework, not as something that we do in the lab that we can talk about in the classroom. As we do this, exercise 1 introduces a model for the process of science. So we're modeling how we model the universe. So there's a lot of interesting meta stuff going on right there. And we talk about, so for years and years and years, more years than we like to recount maybe, I've taught this idea that the way scientists tend to think about the process of science and what we do and how we approach building an understanding of the universe is really consistent with, is really built on the philosophy of Karl Popper. And so we talk about Karl Popper. There's a really excellent article, a short article from Karl Popper that appears reprinted in what's getting to be a very old book now, called Galileo's Commandment. It's a book of collected scientific writings that I go back to quite a bit. It's interesting reading and fun to think about the different ways, the different approaches that scientists were trying to convey what they understood and trying to bring people along to that understanding. And Karl Popper has an article in there, and he talks about falsifiability and about how you model something you know it's not right, and you go and you find the weak spots and you break it down and you build it a new model that's better because of the failures to be able to test the failures of tests. And those tests are typically experimental observational tests. They can be theoretical, but more likely you go out, you make a prediction. So bold science, he says in there, makes a prediction, and that prediction, it gets tested to say, okay, I predict that if we measure this, we will see this. If we don't see this, then we have to say we're wrong, and we have to start from maybe not from completely from scratch, but we have to understand why we're wrong and rebuild our theory and our model. And he says, he uses the shift from Newtonian gravity to Einsteinian gravity as an excellent example, but he also has examples from social science, Marxism, and he has an example of Freudian psychology in there where he talks about immunization to falsification and refusal to accept falsification, and how you rebuild ideas. He writes more, a book like that is something that one could read if you wanted a little more in depth of some stuff that Popper has written about that. But that's the idea. I've taught that for years, that the loop, when you read a textbook, when you read an introductory textbook in science, you often see science modeled as an infinite loop. And we say infinite loop bad for computer programmers, infinite loop good for scientists. And so you'll see the science modeled as a loop like this, and understanding that you don't necessarily go from box 1 to box 2 to box 3 to box 4 and on around. You can jump from 1 to 3 and then move to 2 and to 4 and to 1 and just keep moving around. You move to different places, and different people do these different boxes. And so we use that. We introduce these ideas early on when I teach an astronomy course, and we refer back to it throughout the semester to say, here's what's going on here, and here's what's going on here. Where would Haber-Curtis appear in this model of the process of science, and how would you place Haber-Curtis relative to Harlow-Shapley in the Shapley-Curtis debate in thinking about galaxies, and then what role did Edwin Hubble play, for example. So this is laid out a little bit for you in that first exercise, and it really is an introductory chapter, less than an exercise to read, but there are things to think about and good questions there to follow up on and to go try to find science stories that relate to this. So it was only much more recently that I was at a workshop someplace and became aware, I was vaguely aware of it perhaps before, but became more intimately aware of Kolb's model of experiential learning and realized how similar that was to Popper's model of the scientific process, and to say you can build a model of the scientific process from Kolb's theory of experiential learning, and there's a reference or two in the text for you to do, and you can do a web search and read more about Kolb, and I encourage you to do so, and to think about how science and how what we're calling science right here, and how we're calling astronomy as a part of that science, and as really one of the first of the sciences to grow up to do this kind of work. How does that fit? How can that be modeled by Kolb's experiential learning model right there? And so we try to weave all of that together in the first exercise. I think it's really important to think about those early on in the semester, early on, whenever in the use of your book, whatever format you're using this book. Think about learning goals in the introduction, build your own learning goals, and think about these processes of experiential learning and processes of science, and how you can take those things and transfer them forward to all of the exercises in this textbook. So every exercise, think about what the learning goals are. Think about how you're making progress to those learning goals. There might be a lot of learning goals. It might really just be one learning goal you identify that you want out of a given exercise. So think about how you're using those learning goals, and then the process of science as we've modeled it here. And I encourage you to tweak that process to say, well, this box isn't quite right. Let's take this box and turn it into this other box over here, and let's add this, and let's tweak this description this way. But whatever that's, how would you model the process of science, and how do you see that playing out pieces? Each exercise in this book will build pieces of that process. So there'll be one piece that might emphasize, or there might be two pieces, or there might be a sub piece. You've got a box here that's a piece of the process of science, and it's not really dealing with that whole box. It's dealing with a sub piece of that box. And how would you describe that? And how would you work with that? So that's really what we've got. This is the other, you can go through, you can look at all the exercises and think about how the exercises in this lab book can help you achieve the goals that you want to achieve. It can help you think about how science gets done and how we put the pieces together in order to model the physical universe, and sort of how you might scaffold the exercises that you do into a better understanding of the astronomical process. So thanks everybody. Have fun using this textbook, and well, you can see other videos that give you introductions to specific exercises throughout the text.